What's up, everybody? A few days ago, we ran through the first 3 issues of Jonathan Hickman's House of X title. Well, as promised, today we're going to be following that up with the first 3 issues of its companion title, Powers of 10, which of course was also written by Jonathan Hickman. So, let's jump into it. Now, as I mentioned in the House of X episode, the Powers of 10 title is a direct tie-in. It initiates certain story elements in House of X and elaborates or expands upon others. But it also introduces a much broader view of the time chronology for the long-term story Hickman is unraveling between these 2 books. So while it's true that you could technically read each title on its own and still have a pretty good sense of what's going on, you really have to read both books to really get the complete picture of how Hickman is reshaping the X-Men mythos. And again, I can't stress this enough, you need to read the data pages in each issue, as they contain a crap ton of crucial definitions and world-shaping information. But let's jump into Powers of 10, Issue 1, where we're immediately given the 4 separate timelines we're going to be exploring. Year 1, which would be the recent past, possibly around the time of Xavier creating the X-Men. Then there's Year 10, which would seemingly be considered the present world for the overall story. The third year is Year 100, which is when war breaks out between humans, mutants, and machines. And lastly, Year 1000, where mutants or some other sentient being has seemingly ascended to a higher form of being. But from there, we're taken to Year 1, where we see Charles Xavier walking around at a fair, when he's approached by a strange woman who starts making small talk with him. So she tells him about a fortune teller she walked past, and we're shown 3 tarot cards: the Magician, the Tower, and the Devil, all symbolic of things to come. She then tells Charles that she couldn't help but notice how happy he seemed, and he proceeds to tell her that it's because of a wonderful dream he recently had of a better world and his place in it. And this is where things begin to take a mysterious turn, as the woman responds by saying, "Here's the thing, Charles, it's not a dream if it's real." Obviously, Charles had been taken off guard because he hadn't told her his name yet, so his demeanor changes and he asks, "Do we know each other?" The woman responds by saying, "Yes, we go back quite a ways. Why don't you read my mind and see?" So Charles, who really wants to know who he's dealing with, reads her mind, and the last thing we see is a shocked face as he begins to see her memories. We then jump to Year 10 in the mutant habitat Krakoa, where we pick up where House of X Issue 1 leaves off, with Mystique and Toad arriving through a gateway with the flash drive they stole from Damage Control. We then see Mystique enter the House of M, where she is greeted by Magneto, who asks her if she was successful. She tells him that she got the mysterious flash drive but lost Sabretooth in the process. She also says that before she'll hand over the drive, she has more demands. But at that moment, Professor X arrives and says, "Do you now?" It's at this point we learn that it was Xavier who sent the 3 of them to retrieve whatever was on the flash drive. But we also get a closer look at this very different version of Charles Xavier, who has a much darker tone and even seems a little bit like a villain. So he just uses his power to simply take the drive from Mystique and tells her that he has more demands of her as well, and that everyone who lives in this new better mutant world owes something. Needless to say, that doesn't sound like the Charles Xavier we're used to. Anyway, we then jump to Year 100, where we see that humans have seemingly joined forces with Sentinels and other machines to war against mutants. It's at this point we see that a group of soldiers and robots have captured a black brain telepath named Psylobal, and are interrogating her about the location of her mutant friends. We then see her sister named Rasputin and another mutant named Cardinal, watching the whole thing from a distance. I'll also note that both of these characters look a lot like a hybrid of Nightcrawler and some other mutant, and we'll learn why in just a bit. But Rasputin wants to fight to save Psylobal, but Cardinal is deeply religious and a pacifist, so he doesn't want to engage in violence. He says, "I'll stay back and plant the seed to open the gateway to Krakoa, and pray for their souls in the process." But Rasputin responds by saying, "That's your problem, priest. You've forgotten that machines have no soul, and humans lost theirs a long time ago." And as she finishes saying this, she begins her attack on the humans and machines holding her sister. However, she's quickly overrun by Sentinels and is unable to stop them from taking Psylobal. Now remember those data pages I've been talking about? Well, we're then given several data pages that explain that after years of war with humans and machines, the population of mutants reached a crisis point. So remaining mutant leadership allowed mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister to start a mutant breeding program called the Sinister Line. Said Sinister Line mirrored the Sentinel Hound program, but with a strategy that focused on mixing X genes to create mutants with power sets that had more aggressive and militaristic traits. Okay, 2 things I want to mention here, peeps. First thing is that Mr. Sinister has had an interesting history with the X-Men universe and was actually once a human obsessed with the origins of mutant kind, but we'll get into that in another episode for the sake of time. Second is, if you're not sure who the Hounds are, they first appeared in the Days of Future Past timeline, where certain mutants were brainwashed into hunting down and imprisoning their fellow mutants. With that understanding, the 3rd generation of the Sinister Line produced extremely powerful mutants with multiple Omega-based genes. They were referred to as Chimera-class mutants, and Rasputin is one of them. This generation of Chimera class was extremely successful against the man-machine supremacy, and it seemed like they could be the turning point in the war. But a fourth generation of the sinister mutants suddenly went haywire due to a corrupt hive mind, turned on and killed all the remaining mutants, and caused the downfall of Krakoa. I know, it's getting crazy up in here. There's also a small segment of the sinister mutants called the outlier mutants, which are chimera who, in spite of being bred for war, developed passive power sets and were obsessed with religion. These variants were all called Cardinal. Anyway, we ultimately learned that Mr. Sinister had actually betrayed the mutants for his own selfish gain, and the design flaw in the fourth generation was no accident. We don't get the full details about his motivations, but when he tried to defect to the man-machine supremacy, they decided that they couldn't trust him either and executed him, so that didn't work out for anyone. We then get the first look at the tower we saw in the tarot card in the beginning of the issue, and it turns out to be none other than the Tower of Nimrod the Lesser. It's here we find out that it's Nimrod who's behind all this destruction and death, as they bring Psylobel into the main chamber. The two humans who bring her into Nimrod and his main lieutenant Omega proceed to tell Nimrod that the mutants had somehow gained access to the mainframe, but they don't know what they were looking for or what they found. So Omega scans Psylobel and discovers that she's a former hound form, making it difficult to extract information from her, as hounds were bred to withstand torture. So they decided to, as they call it, give her a bath, where she will be placed in a large tub filled with an AI-powered fluid that essentially distills the victim down to nothing but raw data. Psylobel tries desperately to fight them off, but to no use, and she is thrown into the liquid, almost instantly being reduced to a shell of herself, as she suffers a slow death. We then jump to Krakoa, where we see that an angry Rasputin and a Cardinal manage to survive and escape the fight against the Sentinels and humans, as they walk through a gateway. When they arrive, they are greeted by what appears to be much older versions of Wolverine, Magneto, and a Groot-like being, and Zorn. Now again, this is 100 years in the future, so I'm not sure if it's actually them or if they're Chimera clones from their X genes, but we'll see. Anyway, we also learn on yet another data page that the total remaining mutant population is believed to be less than 10,000, and that they are spread out between two colonies in Shi'ar space, one called Benevolence, which is a transit station located on the fringe of Shi'ar space, and the second being located on the Shi'ar throne world of Chandalar. But the issue wraps up by flipping everything on its head with a jump to year 1000, where we are introduced to what appears to be some sort of highly evolved mutant who is talking to a now Google Home version of Nimrod about how abruptly the human-machine mutant war ended. We also then see that the humans are kept in a zoo-like environment called the Preserve. It's a pretty freaking crazy issue. But that leads us to issue 2, and the issue leads off back in year 1 with Charles Xavier and that same woman, who we now learn is Moira McTaggart, and they're both arriving on Island M in the Bermuda Triangle. Turns out they are there to meet Magneto so that Moira can share the same information with him that she shares with Charles back at the fair, which is that she has lived and died many times, and in every version of the future where Charles Xavier and Magneto fight against each other in the war to protect mutant kind, no matter what they try, they all lose. And that the only way for them to have a chance in the battle to come is that they have to join forces and stand together. Magneto, of course, has serious doubts about all of this, so Charles asks him to open up his mind to him, so that he could show him Moira's memories. Eric does so reluctantly and is shocked to learn that Moira herself is a mutant, as well as devastated to see proof of his future failures and the resulting deaths of so many mutants. Charles then tells Magneto that he and Moira have an ambitious and long-term plan for mutants to thrive and assume their rightful place on Earth. Eric responds by saying, "I won't acquiesce to sympathy or doubt, Charles. I will check you at every moment of weakness, and if you falter, know that I will not." Charles says that he would expect nothing less, and the two shake hands and join forces. We then jump to year 10 on Krakoa, where we see Xavier and Magneto revealing to Cyclops that the information Mystique retrieved on that flash drive she stole from Damage Control was actually the plans for a mother mold, which, as we explained in the House of X episode, is a replicating, adaptive, and self-aware Sentinel factory in orbit around the sun that is capable of creating master molds. So it's a massive sentient machine with an endless source of energy from the sun that constantly produces AI Sentinels dedicated to eradicating all mutant kind. All this information can be found on the data pages in House of X, issue 3. Getting back to the story, Xavier and Magneto then go on to explain that the plans for the mother mold were designed by a group called Orchis, who is made up of human scientists from S.H.I.E.L.D., AIM, SWORD, and Hammer, and even some from Hydra, who saw mutantdom as such a severe threat that they all joined forces to wipe them out. Xavier also drops the unfortunate news that construction on the mother mold has long been underway and is near completion. And when Cyclops basically says, "We fought and defeated Sentinels before, why is this so serious?" Charles drops the bomb that they believe Orchis is preparing to use the mother mold station to bring Nimrod online. That's right, my friends, Hickman gives us the origin of Nimrod in this issue, which is just freaking awesome, especially if you're a longtime X-Men fan. Anyway, Charles and Magneto tell Scott that they can't allow the Mother Mold to come online, because if they do, they will be outmatched and overrun in a very short period of time. So Cyclops promises to get the job done, which of course leads to an assault on the Orchis station that we detailed in the House of X episode. So moving on once again, we then jump back to year 100, where we are brought back to Rasputin, the Cardinal, and the older mutants who bring the data they stole from the mainframe to their boss, who turns out to be none other than Apocalypse. Yes, apparently Apocalypse is running the X-Men now, which is just all kinds of crazy town. But as they're giving Apocalypse the extracted data, they also tell him that Silobel and another mutant named Percival were killed during the mission. And the loss of Percival is a major blow because his abilities allowed him to cloak the team's movements, essentially making them invisible to the man-machine supremacy. We then go to Nimrod, who was investigating to find out what the mutants were looking for within their mainframe. Well, it turns out that it wasn't specific information they stole at all, but rather the encrypted location of the information they are looking for. However, they managed to decode the node containing the location of the information. Then the Wolverine-like mutant reminds them that they'll be without Percival's cloaking ability this time, leaving them completely exposed to the man-machines. So to go get the information, they'll have to fight their way in, hold the man-machines off while they get the data, and then fight their way out. Wolverine then says, it's a suicide mission. You know that, right? But Apocalypse responds to that by assuring success of the mission because he will lead the team himself. We then jump to year 1000, where we see the highly evolved mutants have made contact with a cosmic cloud-like being called Phalanx, which looks a lot like a shadowy Galactus. And when the Phalanx asks the mutants what they seek, they simply reply, Ascension. And issue 2 closes out with a couple of data pages breaking down the hierarchy of species intelligence on the planetary and galactic scales. In issue 3, things lead off back in year 100 with Rasputin, Cardinal, and the other mutants breaking up a horrific ritual being performed at the Man-Machine Supremacy Church of the Ascendancy, where a human baby is being burned by a machine to supposedly purge some of its flawed humanity. We then see Nimrod still trying to figure out why the mutants broke into his mainframe when Omega tells him that the mutants have attacked the church, but he's determined to get to the bottom of what the mutants are up to, so he has Omega go check it out on her own. We then see Cardinal, Zorn, and Rasputin wrecking shop on some of Nimrod's soldiers. That is, until Omega shows up with a crap ton of Sentinels. But this was expected, and their job is to hold them off, while Apocalypse, Wolverine, and we'll call him Groot, work to locate what they came for, which turns out to be the archive records for when Nimrod first came online. They find the records and extract it on some kind of crystal, but it triggers an alarm in Nimrod's tower, and in an instant, boom! Nimrod explodes into the building, sending the mutants flying. Meanwhile, outside, Omega has nearly crushed the other mutants, and only Rasputin is still standing. Rasputin warns Omega to stay back or she'll remove Zorn's mask and expose the singularity in his head. Omega thinks she's bluffing, but in a last-ditch effort, Rasputin rips the injured Zorn's mask off, and all we see is an explosion. We don't know what happened yet, but it can't be good. Back inside the archive, Apocalypse gets a shot in on Nimrod, knocking him into a bunch of debris. So Groot quickly opens a gateway to make their escape. But Apocalypse tells them to take the crystal and go while he holds Nimrod back. So Wolverine and Groot escape, but Apocalypse won't be following them. Because over the next couple of pages, we see a full demonstration of just how unbelievably powerful Nimrod is, as he duplicates himself and proceeds to mock Apocalypse to his face while he completely and quickly destroys him. As in, not even close to a fair fight. To put that in perspective, traditionally, Apocalypse is one of the most powerful mutants in existence. So you can see why Charles Xavier and Magneto were so adamant about stopping him from coming online many years prior. Anyway, we then see that Moira McTaggart was asleep in some kind of sarcophagus the whole time. And it turns out they were collecting the information on Nimrod so they could force feed it into Moira's mind and she could take the information back in time prior to Nimrod's creation. So Wolverine placed a crystal in some kind of implant in her chest, and after she absorbs the information, Moira asks him, "What now?" To which Wolverine replies, "If we succeed, the old man said to send you on your way, because there's nothing left to save here." He then releases his claws and tells Moira he's sorry, and kills her, ending her 9th life and thus allowing her to be reincarnated, effectively taking information back in time that could be the only weapon to help them defeat Nimrod. It's just freaking brilliant, and I love it. But with that said, issue 3 ends, and I have to say it again, Hickman is just absolutely killing it with these 2 titles. The overall story and changes he's making to the X-Men universe is just great and so fun to read. He's also using a bunch of callbacks to previous storylines, like Days of Future Past, which is just awesome. Again, it's such a refreshing and fun direction for the franchise. And remember, this is just an overview of the issues. There's a lot more detail that you can get by picking up the books and reading them for yourselves, which, as always, we highly recommend you do. I'll also add, as of the release of this episode, issue 4 of both House of X and Powers of 10 have been released. But I'll pick up on those when I do my final recap after issue 6 drops for each of those titles. But now it's your turn to let us know what you think of these X-Men books in the comment section down below. Do you love them, hate them, or just meh? let us know. But with all that said, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, friends. But if you like this video, be sure to click that one right here. And if you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe. But I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things comics.